The series begins 20 years ago in the Black Sea region with 4 children, Khalil, Temel, Osman, and Turan. They are playing together, but Khalil has to leave to show his report card to his mother. He runs all the way home, only to find his mother has passed away. He's shown sitting in front of her grave, reciting Al-Fatiha and telling her he got good grades and will study hard to become a dependable man. His father comes out and is overjoyed by his success. The next morning, Khalil is seen with his father, preparing for their journey. His father asks him to fetch his rifle for safety on the road. When Khalil goes inside the house, Ahmed is surprised by Jawad from the Leto family, with whom they have a blood feud. Jawad, on horseback and holding a gun, kills Ahmed in front of Khalil, who tries to defend him with the rifle but fails. Jawad escapes. Laughing, Ahmed is buried and Khalil is left in sorrow. 20 years later, Khalil returns to the Black Sea city. It is revealed that his uncle, Harun, took him to live with him in Istanbul, teaching him that his strength lies in his heart and mind, not in weapons. Khalil comes back to live again in his father's house and starts setting up a tent near his parents' graves. His uncle, Darwish, is delighted to see him and asks why he has returned after all this time. Khalil responds that he has forgotten the blood feud and all he thinks about now is marrying Yasmin, the daughter of Muzaffar. Khalil arrives at the village during a celebration and meets his friend, Turan, who does not recognize him at first. A beautiful girl, Yasmin, appears and runs to Khalil. When she sees him, she introduces him to his friends, who are overjoyed to see him. However, Yasmin is upset with him because he lost contact with her for 5 years, and no one believed her when she said they were in touch, especially her cousins, Ida Noor and Sama. Khalil tells her he loves no one else but her and tries to kiss her, but Yasmin pushes him away, saying he must formally propose to her. She walks away, happy he has returned. Later, Khalil is seen with Turan, Osman, and Temel at a coffee shop. He asks them about the Leto family and if any of them still show up. Turan replies that only Fikret, the brother of Zainab, comes by occasionally for tea. Khalil tells them he wants to marry Yasmin, but Turan wants to tell him something. Temel punches Turan, forcing him to lie and say she just talks too much. After Khalil leaves, it is revealed that Yasmin is loved by Tariq. Zainab. That night, Yasmin is in her room and is surprised to see Khalil standing under her window, asking her to meet him. Yasmin is thrilled and gets ready in front of the mirror, telling her mother she is going out to meet Sama. When she meets Khalil, he asks her to meet him at the waterfalls in the afternoon. Yasmin says she will think about it and that just as she waited for him, he must wait for her. She returns home, happy, but her mother notices her behavior and, worried, calls Sama to find out what is going on. The next day at the airport, Zainab appears, returning from America after finishing her studies and becoming a veterinarian. She is welcomed by Shota, their personal assistant, and a relative of the family. When she arrives home, she is greeted by her brother, Tunke, Fikret, her mother, Nadima, and her foster mother, Sakina. We learn that Fikret is married to Aisha, whose brother is engaged to Zainab. Afterward, Zainab goes to greet her father, Ridwan, who is in his office. He is very happy to see her and asks her to call her half-siblings from her mother, Asiya. We learn that Ridwan is illegally married to his second wife, Asiya, and has 3 children with her, Tariq, Tamer, and Layla. Zainab tells him she just returned and wants to spend the day with her siblings, but Ridwan insists that she should call them. At that moment, Tariq is shown shooting a gun when he receives a call from Zainab informing him of her return. He asks one of his men to inform his siblings. He is then shocked to learn that Khalil has returned and has also met Yasmin. This greatly upsets him and he decides to go see her. We then return to Zainab, who is having lunch with her family, all of whom are happy to have her back. Fikret tells her that Khalil has returned, to which she responds that he was her classmate in primary school. Ridwan asks them to keep an eye on him and make sure he does not stay in the village for more than 5 days. Their conversation is interrupted by the arrival of Levet, Zainab's fiancé and Aisha's brother. It is evident that Zainab does not love him or want to marry him. Later, Tariq arrives with his siblings, Tamer and Layla. Upon seeing him, his father becomes very upset and leaves with Fikret. Zainab asks why, and she learns that her father disapproves of Tariq marrying Yasmin because she is poor. However, it is revealed that Yasmin does not love Tariq and that he only wants her because she caught his eye, intending to own her by any means and then divorce her. Zainab tries to find out the reason from her brother, Fikret, who explains that Yasmin is a poor girl who does not love Tariq. The conversation then shifts to Khalil, and Zainab confesses that she loved him very much when she was young but lost contact when she left. Fikret tells her that Jawad, Tariq's uncle, killed Khalil's father, which is why there is a blood feud between them. He advises her not to talk about Khalil in front of Levent, as he would surely get jealous. A few minutes later, Khalil is shown sitting by the waterfalls when Yasmin arrives. He surprises her by saying he wants to marry her, but is afraid her family will reject him. Yasmin tells him she cannot be away from him, and if necessary, he should elope with her until her family family accepts. Khalil then drives her close to her home. After he leaves, Tariq appears, telling her that he loves her and wants to marry her. She tells him to stay away, that the stars in the sky are closer to him than she is, and that he will never touch her. Tariq responds that she belongs to him, and he will not let anyone else get close to her or marry her. Yasmin ignores him and leaves. When Yasmin returns home, she is very happy and eagerly waiting for news from Khalil about their marriage. However, her mother, Fatima, is very upset and tells Muzaffar that their daughter loves Khalil. Muzaffar says he approves, especially since Khalil is an orphan, and if he proposes, he will not object. At this time, Khalil is at the coffee shop with his friends, and they urge him to marry Yasmin quickly before Tariq proposes to her. As they speak of Tariq, Zainab arrives with Shota. She greets them and tells Khalil that she missed him very much, also asking for his phone number. He replies that he has never owned a phone. Zainab notices the villagers watching them, so she feels compelled to leave. That night, Tariq returns home, drunk and unable to stand. He is met by his mother, Asiya, who disapproves of his behavior. Tariq shouts at her, complaining that his father won't let him marry the girl he loves because he is her illegitimate son, whereas he fulfills all the requests of Nadima's children. Asiya is deeply hurt by his words and starts crying. Tariq breaks down at her feet, crying and expressing his desperate desire to marry. Yasmin, moved by his plea, Asiya tells him she will speak to his father and make sure he agrees. The next day, Darwish and Khalil meet with their uncle, Hafiz, who is the village imam. Khalil asks him to speak to Muzaffar, Yasmin's father, about marrying her. At the same time, Asiya arrives at Ridwan's house and meets Zainab, scolding her for not keeping in touch. When Ridwan sees Asiya, he becomes furious and accuses her of spoiling her son, saying he is tired of Tariq's behavior. However, it is clear that Asiya has influence over him and he cannot refuse her. So, when she tells him to speak to Muzaffar, he reluctantly agrees and calls him to ask for Yasmin's hand in marriage. Muzaffar is ecstatic upon hearing the news, but Yasmin declares she does not agree and walks away. Fatima tells Muzaffar that their daughter loves Khalil and will not marry anyone else. Nonetheless, Muzaffar is eager to escape their poverty and is excited by the prospect of the marriage. Zainab rushes to Khalil and tells him that Tariq wants to marry Yasmin and that her father has agreed. The shock comes when Khalil learns that Jawad is Asiya's brother. He tells her he cannot bear anyone else being near her and suggests they elope. Yasmin agrees and hugs him. We return to Zainab, who is with her mother and Fikret. She refuses to join them in asking for Yasmin's hand, especially since Yasmin does not agree. She wants to speak to her father, but Nadima stops her, advising against worsening her relationship with him and offering to speak to him herself. When Nadima enters the office to speak with Ridwan, she is shocked by his response. He threatens that if she does not accompany them, he will disinherit her children and transfer everything to Asiya and her children because he is not legally married to her and she has no inheritance rights. Nadima reluctantly agrees to ensure her and her children's rights. Meanwhile, Khalil gathers with Darwish, Tamel, and Turan, who all support his marriage to Yasmin and offer to let them stay at Tamel's house on the hill until dawn when they can leave for Istanbul. Tamel is then shown preparing for the wedding. His wife, Aydnur, expresses her frustration with Sama for hiding Khalil and Yasmin's love story from her. Tamel asks her to get ready so they won't be late for the wedding. At this time, Muzaffar and his wife, Fatima, are preparing the place for the Leto family. Meanwhile, Yasmin comes in, packing her clothes to run away before they arrive. A few minutes later, Ridwan arrives with his 2 wives and children, greeted by Fatima and Muzaffar. Ridwan is not pleased to be there but has to follow Asiya's orders. At that moment, Fatima goes to Yasmin's room to call her, but is shocked to find her clothes missing, realizing she has escaped. Yasmin is then shown carrying her suitcase and escaping through the back door, getting into the car with Khalil. Muzaffar is stunned to find out his daughter has run away. Tariq loses his temper and fights with Muzaffar, but Fikret intervenes, asking him to calm down. Ridwan then says he intended for his daughter to be part of their family and rescue them from poverty, but with what she has done, she will only be a servant in his house. He takes his family and leaves. Tariq is displeased that Yasmin rejected him, and his father tells him to return home. Tariq speaks with Fikret, saying he will kill Khalil in front of Yasmin as a warning to anyone who dares oppose them. At that moment, Temel is waiting for Khalil with the rest of the family. Khalil arrives with Yasmin and Hafiz officiates their marriage. Afterward, Khalil and Yasmin stay alone in the house on the hill until morning. Yasmin comes out wrapped in a white sheet as a wedding dress. Suddenly, she stumbles and falls onto Khalil, who moves closer and kisses her. Meanwhile, Tariq refuses to go home and insists on meeting with Hafiz. He sends his men to bring Hafiz to him and asks him about Khalil and their hiding place. Shocked to learn that Hafiz officiated the marriage, he drowns Hafiz to make him confess their location. Unfortunately, Hafiz Hafiz dies, and Tariq tells his men to report that he fell and drowned. Zainab is very upset to learn that Khalil loves Yasmin, but despite this, she decides to help them. She asks Shota to send a message she writes to the coffee shop to reach Khalil quickly before Tariq gets to them. The next day, the police and ambulance arrive and transport Hafiz's body. The medical examiner confirms that there are no injuries and that he likely fell from the bridge and drowned. Darwish is shown, deeply saddened by his loss. When Ridwan hears the news, he becomes very upset and yells at Tariq, telling him not to act on his own. At that moment, Yusuf, Temel's father, arrives and tells him that his son is stubborn like his mother and never listened to him regarding Khalil. He suggests that Khalil and Yasmin are probably hiding in their house on the hill. Therefore, Fikret heads there with Tariq, secretly following. Tariq is surprised to find Temel alone. He searches the entire house but does not find them. Meanwhile, Khalil is shown with Turan and Yasmin after receiving Zainab's message, which says she will help them cross the bridge between their village and Istanbul. Khalil is deeply saddened when he learns that his uncle, Hafiz, drowned and is certain that the Leto family killed him. He vows not to rest until he avenges him. That night, Temel talks with Aidanur, who tries to find out where Khalil is. He tells her that they plan to travel to Istanbul. We learn that Temel and Aidanur are childless and are still consulting doctors. Aidanur approaches him and says that their being together is the most important thing to her. Meanwhile, Yasmin is lying on the ground, gazing at the stars, and tells Khalil how much she loves him. He lies beside her and says he loves her boundlessly. Yasmin recalls the message and tells him that Zainab must love him too, otherwise she wouldn't have risked her family for him. He assures her that she is his first and last love. The next day, Tariq is shown standing outside Temel's house, keeping watch. As soon as Temel leaves, Tariq enters and confronts Aidanur, asking about Khalil's whereabouts. She is terrified and tries to scream, saying she doesn't know where they are. Tariq points a gun at her and mentions that he knows they cannot have children, implying that he will solve that problem for them. Meanwhile, Zainab drives her car towards Khalil. When she arrives at the bridge, Khalil is waiting after bidding farewell to Yasmin. Suddenly, he hears Yasmin scream. She is shocked to find Tariq and his men confronting her. She tries to run, terrified, but he catches her and starts beating her for running away and marrying someone else. Tragically, he slams her head against a rock, killing her instantly. Shocked by her death and seeing her lying in a pool of blood, he screams that she is the reason for all that has happened. At that moment, Khalil arrives and shoots Tariq in the leg. He rushes to Yasmin to save her, only to find her dead. Overcome with grief and rage, he cannot control himself. He pulls out a knife and kills Tariq, then embraces Yasmin, devastated and in shock from her death. At this time, Zainab returns home terrified, informing her mother that she heard gunshots but doesn't know what happened. Soon, Aisha receives the news of her cousin's death, and they all collapse in grief upon hearing it. The police arrive to investigate and find Tariq's body. Meanwhile, Khalil carries Yasmin's body in shock to his family's house and informs Darwish, Fatima, and Muzaffar, who are devastated by the news of her death. Temel and Turan begin digging her grave. Muzaffar tells Khalil to avenge his daughter against the Leto family. When Temel returns home, Ainur asks what happened, and she is shocked to learn that Yasmin and Tariq were killed. She questions how they were found, and Temel suggests that Zainab might have set a trap to get rid of Khalil. Temel then goes to his room, and Aidanur, in tears, sends a message to Sama, asking her not to tell Turan anything. Meanwhile, Asiya reprimands Ridwan, blaming him for the separation between her children and Nadima's children, insisting that her children are not at fault for what is happening. Ridwan takes her in his arms. At the same time, Zainab talks to her mother, frightened for Khalil, and asks her to get rid of Levent because she does not want to marry him. The next day, Fikret goes to the police station and learns from the officer that Khalil has a clean record with no criminal charges, neither here nor in Istanbul. He asks the officer to make sure no one takes any action and that the police will handle bringing justice for Tariq. As Fikret leaves, he notices that Zainab's car has a location marked for Khalil's place. He arrives home furious and asks Shota if he had gone out with Zainab. Shota replies that he stayed home. Fikret instructs him to keep an eye on Zainab and report her every move. He then speaks with Zainab privately and is shocked to learn she went there to help Khalil. He tells her that her recklessness led to Yasmin and Tariq's deaths and orders her to forget everything that happened. A few minutes later, Kairat arrives at the coffee shop. Seeing Temel and Turan, he accuses them of helping Khalil and warns them that if Khalil doesn't turn himself in, they will all suffer along with their families. Before leaving, he tells everyone there is a funeral they must attend. However, Aref, the coffee shop owner, refuses, saying no one will attend the funeral. Fikret insists that his words be heeded and leaves. That night, Khalil walks through the forest until he reaches Osman's house. Osman is shocked to see his condition and is even more stunned to learn that Yasmin was killed. He suspects that Zainab might have told Tariq their location. Osman asks Khalil to rest, but Khalil dreams of Yasmin, who appears in a white dress, asking him to wake up. He embraces her, saying he felt she would return to him, but Yasmin pulls him and tells him to wake up. Khalil wakes up startled and finds 4 armed men entering. He wakes Osman and tells him to go to the back door. Khalil manages to kill all the men with Osman, and they escape to the mountains before the police arrive. Meanwhile, Fikret is at Asiya's house, telling his father about what happened at the coffee shop, assuring him that there is no need to harm anyone and that the message has been delivered. His father asks him to visit Tunkay and Aisha. Ridwan then instructs Rashid, Shota's uncle, to kill everyone at the coffee shop to instill fear in them. The next day, Fikret learns that Levent sent his men to eliminate Khalil, but Khalil killed them all and escaped. Ridwan is furious and wishes that Jawad had killed Khalil when he was a child. He asks Fikret to contact Levent for a meeting. Minutes later, Levent arrives, greets Zainab, and leaves his phone behind to meet with her father. Zainab opens his phone and discovers that Levent hosted a party while they are in mourning for her brother. She decides to use this to break off her engagement with him. The whole family gathers at Asiya's house, where Zohal, Levent's mother, arrives. Asiya falsely accuses Khalil of killing her son's beloved after kidnapping her and also killing Tariq. Zainab overhears this but is stopped by Nadima from speaking up. They all then leave to bury Tariq. At the same time, Adenur talks to Sama, blaming herself for Yasmin's death. The shock comes when we learn that Tariq raped her on the day he attacked her, and she kept it from Tamel out of fear he would leave her. Sama comforts her and takes her for a walk. They arrive at the coffee shop, where Tamel notices her distress. Suddenly, 2 of Ridwan's men arrive, kill Aref, and injure Darwish, along with several villagers before fleeing. At the funeral, after Tariq is buried, Ridwan, overwhelmed with grief, declares that anyone who helps Khalil will be his enemy, while those who stand by them will be rewarded. At that moment, Khalil and Osman are in the forest looking for a place to stay. Khalil sets a trap to keep them safe. Suddenly, 2 armed men attempt to kill Khalil, but they fall into his trap, realizing that Levent sent them. Khalil and Osman search for a place to sleep and find a cave. Later, Tamel and Turan arrive in the forest to find Khalil, but fall into the trap. Khalil rescues them and is shocked to learn about Aref's death and his uncle's injury. He then strips the clothes off the 2 men and tells them to inform Levent that he will turn himself into the police. Zainab is seen talking to her mother and Sakina, telling them she will confront Levent after discovering his betrayal and must break off the engagement. That night, she and Shota go to Levent's house and find him partying with several girls. He is shocked to see her. She slaps him for cheating on her and being disrespectful despite her brother's recent death. Levent slaps her back, causing her lip to bleed. Shota tries to defend her, but Levent's men overpower him. Zainab separates them, throws her engagement ring at Levent, and leaves, feeling triumphant that her plan worked. However, she is shocked to hear from her father that Levent and his family will come to apologize. Zainab refuses and says she does not want to marry him. Her father yells at her, blaming her for going to Levent's house, saying he is single and it was inappropriate for her to go there. He then declares the discussion over. The next day, Aisha tries to talk to Zainab, explaining that her brother wasn't cheating on her and that he just had a business meeting. She insists that everyone makes mistakes and that Zainab should give him another chance. Meanwhile, Levent is talking with his mother and Asiya, expressing his anger at being slapped by Zainab in front of his men. Asiya calms him down, promising to make Ridwan approve their marriage as soon as possible. Their conversation is interrupted when his men arrive, revealing that Khalil attacked them and promised to turn himself in. However, Levent dislikes how easily Khalil agreed to surrender and orders his men to set a trap and kill him before he reaches the station. Unfortunately, Khalil anticipates their plan, kills Levent's men, and escapes with his friends. When the police arrive, they don't find Khalil, but discover his car near Muzaffar's house, realizing it was a ruse to mislead them. A few minutes later, Levent and his family arrive at Ridwan's house for lunch to reconcile with Zainab. Although she is reluctant, his mother tries to persuade her by promising to open a dairy factory to fulfill her dream. Levent presents her with a ring, but he receives news that Khalil killed all his men after supposedly surrendering. Zainab becomes furious, accusing Levent of not wanting peace in the family, and storms to her room in tears. She notices her window open, and as she closes it, is shocked to find Khalil behind her, seeking revenge. Zainab tries to explain that she only wanted to help him and had no part in the plan against him. Khalil doesn't believe her and says he was ready to surrender, but they wanted to kill him, so now he has to kill her brother and her children. Zainab, in tears, begs him to reconsider. her, saying her brother's children are innocent and he shouldn't repeat his past mistakes. Khalil ignores her plea and heads downstairs with his gun. Seeing the children, he is moved by their innocence and decides against harming them. Returning to Zainab's room, she is relieved that he changed his mind. Meanwhile, Levent apologizes in front of everyone for hitting Zainab and asks to go to her room to apologize and give her the engagement ring. Aisha takes him upstairs, but when Zainab hears his voice, she refuses to let him in, claiming she doesn't want to reconcile. Suddenly, the police arrive and Zainab asks him to meet them. Levent goes down while Khalil is anxious, not knowing why the police are there. Zainab assures him that she can help him escape without anyone noticing. She learns that the police intend to search the entire house, so she asks her mother to go to their other house to calm her nerves. Zainab goes to her room and tells Khalil she will hide him in her car before the police reach him. She manages to get him into the car trunk and drives away. Along the way, Khalil expresses his doubts about her help, but Zainab reassures him, stating she wants to help him and also seek revenge against her fiancé. A few minutes later, she arrives at the house on the hill and prepares some food for them. She tells Khalil about her family, explaining that her father loves Asiya very much and therefore fulfills all her requests. She shares that she and Tariq were born a week apart and that Aisha married her brother after Asiya convinced her, but in the end, they love each other. Regarding her engagement to Levent, she was forced to accept after he saved her from her cousin, Yavuz, who wanted to marry her. Khalil uses this point to ask her for the location of her uncle's weapons cache. Zainab agrees to his request to prove her trustworthiness. When Zainab goes to the kitchen, she sees Khalil has fallen asleep from exhaustion and looks at him with loving eyes. The next day, Nadima asks Shota to go to the house on the hill to check on Zainab since her phone is off and she is worried. Meanwhile, Aisha is upset that Zainab refused to reconcile with her brother. Nadima talks to her, asking her not to interfere in their lives and explaining that Zainab is stubborn and won't accept such a situation. Asiya is with Zuhal and suspects that Zainab loves someone else, as she would have taken her belongings and returned to America if that weren't the case. She decides to find out the truth. When Aisha learns about this, she is surprised, but Asiya asks her to speak with Elif, who will tell her everything. She then suggests they visit Muzaffar to offer condolences for his daughter. A few minutes later, Asiya arrives with Layla and Zuhal at Muzaffar's house. He is surprised by their visit. Asiya says she wants to see Sama and Aidanur to confront them. When they arrive, she praises Tariq in front of them, claiming that Khalil came between him and Yasmin. Aidanur can't stand her comments and leaves, making Asiya suspect that her son did something to her, causing her to flee. Khalil wakes up startled but finds Zainab has prepared breakfast for him. Suddenly, Shota arrives, so Zainab asks Khalil to hide until she can get rid of him. When she sees Shota, she asks why he is there. He replies that her phone is off and everyone is worried about her. He notices 2 cups and suspects someone is with Zainab. He calls his wife, Elif, telling her to go to Zainab's place and see who is with her. Elif arrives, surprising Zainab, and says they share a secret and that if Shota said someone was with her, he wasn't lying. She tries to get Zainab to admit she loves someone other than Levent. Zainab eventually admits it and Elif is very happy for her, saying goodbye and leaving. Zainab then talks to Khalil about the weapons cache, explaining everything about it and warning him about the surveillance cameras. She mentions that she can benefit from a conflict between her uncle and father, which would destroy their business and allow her to get rid of Levent. Khalil holds her hand and asks her to reconsider. Zainab reassures him that she is with him and would never betray him for money, unlike everyone else. Zainab takes Khalil to the weapons cache and shows him its location. She explains how to access it and asks him to be careful. She then receives a call from Levent and, to provoke him, tells him she is on her way to her uncle Darsin to meet Yavuz. Levent becomes furious upon hearing this and decides to go there. Zainab arrives and meets her uncle and Yavuz, telling them about Levent and how she broke off their engagement after he hit her. Yavuz becomes enraged hearing this. Zainab reassures him and tries to gain his support. Just as she is about to leave, Levent arrives and demands that Zainab come with him. Yavuz threats Levent, saying he won't let him harm her. During the drive, Zainab notices that Levent is taking a different route towards the bridge where she was supposed to meet Khalil. She fears that Levent knows she helped Khalil. However, Levent surprises her by saying that this is the place where he confessed his love for her. Zainab tells him there is nothing between them anymore and drives away in her car. Rushdie, Aref's cousin, is revealed to have betrayed Khalil for money from Ridwan. When Shota learns about this from Sakina, he is shocked and cannot believe Rushdie sold out his cousin for money. He warns Elif not to speak about Zainab to anyone. Rushdie is seen sitting with Yusuf, asking him to join Tamel and Khalil to avenge Aref's death, but Yusuf is clearly suspicious of him. Meanwhile, Khalil is with his friends in the forest, explaining that Zainab wasn't the one who informed Tariq and that she showed him the weapons cache location. They all think the plan is to inform the police, but Khalil surprises them by saying they will steal the weapons instead. That night, Khalil, Osman, Tamel, and Turan manage to break into the weapons cache and take all the necessary weapons. Khalil loads the small car with weapons and tells them he will handle the larger vehicle. He surprises them by driving the large vehicle to the police station. When the police officer opens the vehicle, he finds it full of weapons and realizes it belongs to the Leto family. When Yavuz learns about the theft, he kills all his men for causing the loss. Aisha talks to Fikret, expressing her suspicion that Zainab has someone else in her life, especially after she went to meet Yavuz. Fikret becomes furious and calls Yavuz, who does not answer. He goes to Zainab in a rage and asks why she met Yavuz. At that moment, Yavuz calls back, and Fikret is shocked to learn about the weapons theft. He tells his mother that he will go to their other house and inform his father. Zainab is very upset, especially when she learns that Aisha is the cause and decides to go to the house on the hill. A few minutes later, Fikret arrives with his uncle and Yavuz at Asia's house. They are convinced that Levent is the one who stole the weapons. When Ridwan hears about the theft, he insists that Levent would never do such a thing and asks them to keep the matter quiet. That night, Tamel returns to his father's house, saying he came to check on them. His mother informs him that Rushdie wants to join them. She leaves with his father so he can rest. Tamel notices that Adenur has been unhappy for a while. Khalil returns to the house on the hill, where Zainab greets him and asks him to change his clothes while she prepares food for him. She then asks him to tell her everything that happened. The next day, Tamel is seen sitting with Rushdie, who insists on joining him and Khalil to avenge Aref. Seeing Rushdie's determination, Tamel agrees to take him along. Tamel bids farewell to his family and leaves, but the police are tracking him. The commander prepares the cars and armored vehicles to head to their location. When Fikret arrives, he's surprised to learn from the commander that the stolen weapons are with them. Fikret returns home and informs his father and uncle. Ridwan is convinced there is a traitor among them and is determined to find out who it is, since only they knew about the weapons cache. As Zainab arrives at the house on the hill, Levent is on his way there, encouraged by Asiya to be strong like Tariq and bring Zainab to her knees. Minutes later, Levent arrives and assaults Zainab, hitting her. She runs to her room, frightened, wishes Khalil were there with her. Tamil reaches the forest with Rushdie, but the police also arrive and monitor the area. Sensing their presence, Tamil fires a warning shot into the air to alert his friends. Unfortunately, the police arrest him, accusing him of possessing the same weapons stolen from the cache. Khalil tries to distract the police and informs Turan and Osman of what happened, instructing them to return to the cave. The commander decides to personally arrest Khalil and orders his men to find Turan and Osman. While searching for Khalil, the commander eventually finds him. They point their weapons at each other, only to realize they know each other. Khalil embraces the commander, learning that Tariq discovered his location after visiting Tamel at home, likely tipped off by Adenur. The commander then returns to his men, claiming he couldn't find Khalil, and leaves. Back at her room, Zainab is terrified. Luckily, Shota arrives and hears her voice. He tries to intervene, but Levent's men stop him, brandishing weapons. Shota retreats, drives his car at full speed, and rams them, rescuing Zainab from Levent's grasp. Seeing the bruises on her face, Shota loses control and starts beating Levent, intending to kill him. Zainab stops him and stands up to Levent, threatening to kill him if he comes near her again. Shota takes Zainab to his house and calls Fikret to inform him of what happened. Fikret instructs him to bring her home. Zainab talks with Shota and Elif, revealing that she had been hiding Khalil, and asks Shota to go to the forest and help him. When Zainab returns home, Fikret is angry about what happened to her and decides to take revenge on Levent. Zainab asks what his father thinks, and Fikret replies that his father said he would handle it. At that moment, Ridwan arrives at Asia's house. Asia tells him that what Levent did was his right and questions why his daughter went to a house alone and was affectionate with someone other than her fiancé. Ridwan can't respond and leaves, returning home to Nadima. He gathers his family around, and Zainab is very happy she managed to get rid of Levent. However, Ridwan starts talking about Tariq and how he agreed to his marriage to Yasmin, saying he learned a lesson he will never forget. He then turns to Zainab and tells her that from now on, anything he loves must be loved by his children, shocking everyone by announcing that Zainab will marry Levent, and it's a final decision. Khalil meets with his uncle, Darwish, who tells him that Tamel and Rushdie have been arrested and that Adenur was the one who informed Tariq about his location. Darwish explains that Adenur was forced to do it and reveals that Tariq raped her. Moments later, Darwish arrives at Yusuf's house and informs him that his son, Tamel, has been arrested with Rushdie. Yusuf yells at his wife, blaming her for for Rushdie being with Temel, but Darwish says the important thing now is to go to the station and warn Temel to stay silent. He also tells Yusuf to inform Ridwan to shift the blame to one of his men, or they will all end up in prison. Darwish then talks to Adenur, urging her to tell her husband everything, and she breaks down, fearing that Temel will divorce her. When Khalil returns to the house on the hill, he finds the place in disarray and realizes someone attacked Zainab. He sees her enter her room, devastated and shocked by her father's decision. As she reaches for a glass of water, she is startled when someone grabs her, causing her to drop and break the glass. She is shocked to see Khalil, who is worried about her. Unfortunately, Fikret hears the noise and comes to check. Zainab tells him she dropped the glass and asks to be left alone. Zainab then tells Khalil about her father's decision to marry her to Levent to avoid losing his business partnership. They plan for Khalil to abduct her on her wedding day before the marriage contract is signed. Khalil suggests she leave the town, but Zainab refuses, saying Levent would still find her. Khalil then asks her to bring Jawad back to town, revealing that he is the one who killed his father. Zainab agrees and says she will talk to Elif, and through her conversation with Aisha, manage to bring Jawad back, especially when he knows she doesn't want to marry Levent. This will give Khalil a chance to avenge his father. The news reaches Rashid, who tells Ridwan about Yusuf's suggestion that someone should be sacrificed to free Rushdie from prison and kill Khalil. Rashid is shocked to learn that his son, Senk, will be the one to go to prison. Reluctantly, Rashid agrees and goes to inform his son. Meanwhile, Layla, Asiya's daughter, brings tea to Senk, and it is evident they have feelings for each other. Senk is shocked to learn he is the one who will be sent to prison. Zainab talks to Elif and asks her to convince Aisha to bring Jawad back from his trip. However, Elif is very scared, as Jawad is a dangerous man whom no one can control. Suddenly, they hear Sakina crying hysterically after learning that her son will go to prison. She faints from the shock and cannot calm down. Meanwhile, Khalil is at his uncle Darwish's house, who tells him that Zainab wants him to help her escape from the wedding. He also mentions that Jawad will return to take his revenge. At that moment, the commander arrives and informs Khalil that neither Temel nor Rushdie has talked, and that Senk will take their place in prison. Khalil is surprised to learn that Jawad is returning and is told to leave Jawad to handle his own revenge. Moments later, Schenk arrives with Rashid at the police station to surrender. Temel and Rushdie are released, and Temel is surprised to see Adenur crying and distressed. She rushes away to vomit, unable to control herself. Khalil meets with Rushdie and agrees to let him join them, taking everyone to the forest. When Layla hears about Senk being imprisoned, she is shocked and devastated, showing her sadness to her father. Asiya, being shrewd, suspects that her daughter is in love with Senk. Otherwise, she wouldn't be so upset about his arrest. Therefore, Ridwan gathers his brother and Yavuz to discuss business, but he is surprised when Darsan asks for his daughter's hand in marriage, referring to Zainab, after learning she broke off her engagement with Levent. Ridwan agrees to the request, even to Fikret's surprise. It turns out Ridwan also agreed to Yavuz marrying his daughter, Layla, who becomes very frightened and asks Fikret to save her. However, Fikret cannot go against their father's wishes. Layla then goes to Asiya, distraught, and tells her about the arranged marriage to Yavuz. Asiya scolds her, saying she should marry Yavuz instead of Senk, the servant's son. Later, Elif talks to Aisha, trying to express her deep concern for her husband and saying that no one can stand up to Khalil except her uncle, Jawad. She adds that once Jawad hears that Zainab refuses to marry Levent, he won't stay silent. Aisha considers her words, and Elif informs Zainab, who is delighted that her plan worked. She asks Shota to go to the forest and inform Khalil of the news. When Fikret returns home, he informs his mother about Layla's marriage to Yavuz. Zainab is shocked, especially since Layla is still young and hasn't finished her education. Sakina reveals that Ridwan sent her son to prison upon learning that Layla loves him and that he is determined to destroy his children's happiness. Elif calls Zainab aside and tells her that she learned from Aisha that she informed her aunt, making it the perfect time for Zainab to declare her refusal, leading to Jawad's arrival. Zainab gets into the car with Shota and heads to Asiya's house, confronting her about agreeing to Layla's marriage to Yavuz. Asiya blames Zainab and insists that her wedding to Levent will happen, but Zainab provokes her by declaring she will never marry him. Angered, Asiya calls Jawad and asks him to intervene. Zainab arrives with Shota at the forest and asks him to inform Khalil that Jawad is on his way. Suddenly, Shota falls into a trap. Khalil and his friends come out, initially thinking Shota is against them. Khalil reassures them that Shota is on their side and has helped him a lot. Shota then talks privately with Khalil, revealing that Rushdie betrayed his cousin's blood to Ridwan and is coming to kill him. Khalil sets sets a trap for Rushdie, and later that night he steps out for some air. Rushdie follows him, holding a weapon, and tells Khalil he is there to kill him, with Ridwan promising him a luxurious life after his death. Just as Rushdie raises his gun, Shota shoots him. Temel and the others wake up startled, and seeing Rushdie dead, Temel apologizes to Khalil for bringing him into their group. The next day, Levant and his men stand by the road, and a large truck arrives. The surprise is that Jawad is in the truck, making Levant very happy, thinking his uncle will solve his problems. Jawad goes to Asiya's house, greeting her children and his sister, Zuhal. He meets with Asiya, who sadly tells him that Ridwan left her when he found out she called him. This angers Jawad, and he decides to confront Ridwan. Ridwan is having lunch with his family when Jawad and Levant arrive. Jawad immediately tells Aisha to pack her things and her children's and leave with him. Fikret stands up to him, saying he cannot do that, and Ridwan asks Jawad to sit and talk. Jawad threatens their business, questioning how Zainab can refuse to marry Levant. Zainab speaks up, saying she does not love him. Nadima also speaks, saying they are ready to lose their business, but will never let her grandchildren be taken away. Ridwan becomes angry, feeling threatened about his business, and tells Jawad that Zainab will marry Levant tomorrow. Zainab is shocked by her father's decision, and Fikret is unable to help his sister. Levant then kisses Zainab and apologizes to her, but their conversation is interrupted by Tusha, who informs Ridwan that the commander wants to see him. At the station, Ridwan learns that Rushdie was killed. He pretends not to know him, telling the commander he is busy with his daughter's wedding, and leaves. He gets into his car with Rashid and tells him that he underestimated Khalil and needs to set him up against Jawad to get rid of both of them. At that moment, Temel arrives at Darwish's house. Darwish asks Turan to meet with Sama so he can speak to Temel alone. Temel is shocked to learn that Ida Noor was raped by Tariq and that she kept it a secret from him. Later, Temel returns home with Turan, who learned everything from Sama. He finds Ida Noor in a distressed state, especially after discovering she is pregnant with Tariq's child. When she sees Temel, she runs to him and hugs him, but notices he is distant. Realizing he knows her secret, she breaks down crying, explaining she couldn't tell him. Temel refuses to listen, takes off his wedding ring, gives it to her, and leaves. He goes to the forest to be with Khalil, telling him he left Ida Noor and can't forget that she played a part in Yasmin's death. Khalil advises him not to abandon the love of his life in a moment of anger and reminds him that Ida Noor is not to blame for everything that happened. The next day, Zainab finds Aisha has prepared a wedding dress and jewelry for her to wear. Zainab refuses, saying she will not wear them, and goes to her room. There, she is surprised by Fikret, who offers her a bag of money to escape before marrying Levant. He is deeply saddened that he cannot stand up to their father. Zainab, with tears in her eyes, tells him she cannot run away and must face her situation to live her life. She hugs Fikret, crying. A few minutes later, Jawad gathers with Ridwan and the rest of the family, announcing that he has bought all the weapons as a wedding gift for Levant and Zainab. He asks Yavuz and Levant to reconcile. Jawad then decides to burn down Khalil's house so that when he finds out, they can finish him off. However, Khalil discovers that the target is actually Muzaffar's house. It turns out Jawad suspected one of his own men, and upon discovering who it was, kills him, only to realize he killed the wrong person. A while later, Jawad and his men arrive at Muzaffar's house with gasoline to burn it down. When Jawad knocks on the door, Muzaffar opens it, and Jawad is shocked to see Khalil, who kills all of Jawad's men and grabs Jawad by the throat. Khalil tells him he has waited 20 years for this moment to avenge his father. He throws Jawad to the ground and pours gasoline on him, but Darwish stops him, advising against being cruel and torturing him. Khalil ties a rope around Jawad and hangs him, remembering his father's death. After Jawad dies, Khalil asks his friends to take Jawad's body and hang it in the village square for everyone to see. Khalil walks away with tears in his eyes, having avenged his father after 20 years. The first part of the series ends here.